Welcome to the EUCannaJobs Potcast. We're excited to have you with us as we explore what's happening in the European cannabis industry. I'm your host, Andy Mansfeld, the founder of EUCannaJobs. EUCannaJobs brings together European cannabis companies with people looking to join the industry or who are in the industry looking for their next opportunity. Today, we have with us Chris Tasker. We're very honored to have him. He's from the UK, and he's been involved in the cannabis industry for a number of years. He's all about science, research, data, and education. He even has a master's of research. He's also the founder of Global Cannabinoid Solutions. Thanks for joining us, Chris. How are you doing?
My pleasure, Andy. I'm doing very well, thank you. It's been a lovely start to the year.
Great.
Things, I think, sprouted back to life after Christmas as well. So everyone's very active, and there's lots more positive talk in the cannabis industry, but also mainstream media scrutiny. So a fun and exciting time to be in the cannabis industry, and even better to be on your podcast, Andy. So what a wonderful start to the week, a big Monday, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. Our pleasure for sure. Like you said, there is definitely, it seems to me also like a kind of a upbeat mood in the cannabis industry in Europe. I think a little bit probably the opposite of what's happening in North America still, where the mood is generally negative and at times getting worse with current tax suggestions happening in some states over there who want to increase taxes even further. But anyway, that's a whole different story. Let's just talk about you and tell us, how did you first get involved in cannabis and end up in the cannabis industry? How did all that happen?
It was a long time ago, back at university, really. I think whilst I was at university doing a sort of general medical research degree and looking more at sort of medical physiology and then creating therapeutics to target that medical physiology, basically, I had a very wonderful opportunity to choose what field of research to look into for our sort of research projects, and beautifully, I was able to work on some gut research essentially into the endocannabinoid system, and I was like, what on earth is that? What is that word? Endocannabinoids, and then gut disorders and phytocannabinoids as well. And so that was the first time I think I saw CBD talked about in a university research setting, basically. Mm-hmm. And when I found out that that was a optional topic, the topics included sort of zebrafish studies and looking at growth rates of different, tumors and cell lines, things like that. I had some gut disorders at the time as well, and so it was like a perfect synergy of, I should probably, it applied. I found it interesting. I think there was early sort of CBD discussions and cannabis sort of debates ongoing that I'd interacted with and sort of been exposed to. But then when I saw it at university, it was sort of like a beautiful synergy. And then I got to research under some wonderful professors and experts who were obviously leaders in their field. And so you got to see sort of like what was going on the front lines, really, of cannabinoid research. And that was my first, I guess, formal introduction to it. And then that has led to more sort of discussions with patients. People would mention, what are you studying, Chris? I'm studying cannabinoids and the gut and inflammation. And then obviously it would go to, my mom or my dad or my auntie or uncle or someone in my family or a friend used cannabis oils, etc. And then you get talking about cancer and all sorts of different things with people. And so you hear colloquially in conversations what people are talking about in the research world as well, and some of the academic papers. And so it was interesting to see sort of where the rubber met the road, really, in terms of science, medicine, and then getting to go and conduct my own research, grow cells, play with tumors, And then 2018, 2019 is when the UK industry opened up a little bit. And so that's when I started speaking with more companies and CBD businesses wanting help with X, Y, Z. And so it sort of stemmed from there, really. And then, yeah, led to me deciding to set up a company where people could access more scientific intelligence themselves and independently. And then I could bring in the help of other people to make sure that the best possible information was getting to the people that needed it most, and then finding cool and interesting ways to try and commercialize that, monetize that, but then also pay all the people that were helping me deliver the work and do the research and get the findings. So I've been very fortunate to team with some lovely people, work with lots of lovely people, go to lots of different places in the UK and around Europe to go and talk about cannabis-y stuff. So it's been a wonderful random journey, and I'm glad I didn't sort of go for some obscure field study
Zebrafish.
that didn't really line up with me, or I don't know. A lot of people do sort of like fourth degrees, so I've been very lucky that I've been able to research something that was sort of topical, interesting, relatively sort of tied to me in some way, and sort of it just was a nice grain of knowledge to sort of pursue academically, and then learning from some of the best people in the industry as to what's going on with the science, how's it all tied together, how do you do research, what is research, and how do you write it up so it looks nice and is presentable as well. So
Yeah.
that was that's my origin story in a way.
Okay. Nice.
But then we've talked a bit about Poland and living overseas and other cool parts as well, I guess, Andy. So I've brushed up across lots of nice, lovely places and been very lucky. But,
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned, trying to bring together in one spot, a lot of these different things that are out there, a lot of this research and information and data. Because, there's more and more information out there, and it is sometimes hard to know where to look other than just doing a Google search or whatever, where you can find kind of everything curated, for lack of a better word. And it's great to have that. I know there are a few other sites out there that do it, but it's always interesting when you start looking at it. What has been to you maybe one of the biggest surprises that you've seen kind of coming out of research, and how that applies to, like you mentioned, the people who are saying, I've got my grandmother who has cancer or whatever else.
I think understanding that's a quite a nice question as well, Andy. Very deep. I think there's a lot around the scientific process, and then the research process, and then the commercialization process of science, and how that translates and relates to medicine overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that was probably the most interesting thing for me, is just seeing like the journey from I've got an idea, I'll test it in a petri dish, through to how does that get turned into a licensed drug that's available on the National Health Service, for example, in the UK, versus how does it then get into or turn into an industry that prescribes cannabis, for example. And with that being pretty new and uncharted for cannabinoids, it's been interesting to see how, watching people struggle with it, watching how people have tried to get around it, watching the different interpretations of how the same science should go into the pharmaceutical processes and the clinical research processes, and then seeing what patients think and seeing what the business owners of the clinics think, and just seeing right through the whole supply chain has been super, super insightful, I suppose. So you can sort of see like the inner workings of how society's dealing with things at a public health level, how doctors are dealing with it at a medical intervention level, and then politicians and everyone else, investors, executives, and everyone sort of in between, really. So I'd say that's been the biggest thing that stood out to me, though, is just seeing how innocent bits of data and research gathered in the lab, seemingly objectively, or most of the time quite passionately, then gets used or turned into like a media article or a blog post or a bit of a promotional campaign. And then sometimes how that fact or finding that was observed that provides a bit of a hypothesis, let's say, or a bit of a demonstration of a point, how that can sort of be extrapolated into a whole brand of products or a business. So it's been very interesting to see how all the research ties to the real world and vice versa. Real world stuff translates into research and business and everything else in between, basically. So I'd say that's probably, after doing a degree, that would be the most useful thing to sort of see is, I guess,
And it's a very slow process, isn't it?
Oh, painful, really. And I can see why there's so many upset patients as well. And I've talked about this quite a bit this week with friends and colleagues, is just, and I found it frustrating as well, how slow that is, but how simple theoretically it should be too. But time and money and everything that goes into it just makes it so, the science and the end medicine seem to be quite distant or far apart almost. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with when they see the medical system is, well, why it's so there, it's just so easy, the research is there right in front of you, why can't you do anything with it? Well, you've got to engineer it to products and get around different.
Well, there's a lot of politics involved too, right?
Well, precisely.
So, I mean, for instance, in the U.S. for many years you couldn't do any research except for a small handful of people because you couldn't. Basically, it was extremely difficult to get your hands on as a researcher cannabis legally to even do the research. Definitely couldn't get any funding to do research from the government, and no one else was funding it. Pharma wasn't funding it, so pretty much that meant almost no research was happening. What was it like in the UK, let's say 10, 20 years ago? Was there any research happening at that point, or is it also like in the US where it's pretty much non-existent?
I think we've always had the classic studies around the harms of cannabis and cannabinoids, for example. There's a pretty good track record of people looking at, say, psychosis and things like that associated with cannabis and different levels of mental health, and looking at the harms. And really, I think it's only the last 15 years where the UK's maybe caught up in terms of, and I say the UK state-funded research, there's been quite a lot, say, going on privately or by British companies or universities privately, but for the most part, it's been more demonstrating the harms, and then slowly we've caught up to the endocannabinoid system, endocannabinoids. But as a whole, if compared to, say, other fields of research and study, I think there's been, well, fractions less. I mean, we're talking about, very small portions, I think, financially, that have been contributed, say, cannabinoid and especially endocannabinoid research, for example, compared to opiates or basically any drug. And I guess it is fundamentally a bit of a financial game at the end. But the UK, we could be doing a lot more overall. We keep talking about, we need more studies, we need more data, we need more research. But as a whole, if we are doing it, it tends to just be observational. There are a couple more trials popping up or that have been funded and approved, but as you say, slow, painful, and very expensive too. So we're a long way off going through the traditional clinical processes. So I do wonder whether that opens up a bit of a decriminalization opportunity as well, whereby we could then support and allow members of the public to access some of the therapeutic elements of cannabis more independently, rather than trying to engineer a full supply chain around it immediately. So I think there's a lot to be said there for some potential side steps or
Mm-hmm.
out of the box approaches that have been tested elsewhere, in addition to the research funding. But for the most part, like generally speaking, most cannabinoid research as a whole is sort of preclinical animal and cell line studies. And then if we have got tests in humans, it's looking more at like observational studies, and there's some nice biological data that's been gathered there, but not quite specific to say endocannabinoid levels. And that's sort of where it seems more papers and research groups are looking towards as well. What's happening to these endocannabinoids and some of the enzymes and some of the genes associated with those too. So there's some quite interesting avenues that it's going in. But as for the UK, Andy, we are very far behind. So there's a lot of us looking towards America and Canada as well, despite
Yeah.
all the grumbling and negativity that we sort of hear.
So you mentioned decriminalization. I mean, they did decriminalize, or not just decriminalize, they legalized personal use and possession in Germany this past year, which also at the same time they removed cannabis from the list of narcotics. So cannabis in German law is no longer a narcotic; it's just a substance. Um, yeah, simple. Um, and that makes it also a lot easier. That led to it being a lot easier for physicians to prescribe since it's no longer part of this narcotic law and things like that. Also moved it from one department into a different department. So it's no longer under basically a medical department. Now it's actually more under, I believe, an agriculture type department. So a lot of things happened due to it being removed from the narcotics list. Is England, is the UK looking at decriminalization, looking at legalization in any real manner? I'm sure there's people talking about it, but is there much happening there?
You sort of overall, I think it would be a good and wise approach to pursue, as Germany has. I don't think Germany burnt down in the last couple of months since all of that started happening as well. But I guess there's a couple of perspectives to look at it from the UK. Like academically, I think there's a pretty good appetite there for, say, reform and decriminalization. You hear a lot more about harm reduction and the economic costs as well and benefits of maybe dialing some of that back and then repurposing some of those funds to public health. From a policing perspective, I know there's a lot of police that are terrified of that scenario, but it also means that they can still focus on crimes, but not like the possession side of things, which a large amount of people in the UK possess drugs and break laws, particularly around the sort of cannabis topic. And there's a pretty heavy appetite from the public and young people as well, especially to sort of maybe recategorize some of those procedures. And globally, there seems to obviously be that trend towards decriminalization and just getting out of the way and letting the public... People are going to consume drugs for the most part. We've tried our best to try and stop that without going full military intervention. And we've seen that that's not really pushes in the right direction. And we could cite all the papers in the world.
And in some places, full military intervention. Look at South America. Look at Central America. I mean, the U.S. has been leading wars there for decades in the name of the war on drugs. They've been had huge military presences in Colombia to fight the cocaine wars. And what has it brought? Nothing. Literally nothing, except for tens of thousands of dead people in Colombia, tens of thousands of farmers who are poorer because they decide they go the legal route, but then they make a tenth of the money, if even that much, and can barely survive. Whereas they could just grow the cocoa plants and make a lot more money. I mean, so unfortunately, there is militarization in some places, and of course, as you would expect, leads to death and destruction and mayhem. I mean, yeah, Europe, we don't deal with militarization of it, but
Feels like it
certainly
sometimes, but
it
no.
seems like it sometimes, But when you compare it to other places, it's not quite that bad. But yeah, I know what you mean.
So we're rubbing up against that same sort of conundrum now. A lot of the news at the moment, this last week or two, has sort of probed at that same question of, well, we've got medical clinics that can slightly support the demand and the need and the health crisis and inequality that's sort of there, but also there's still 99% of the public that fall in the criminal sector, and we know 99% of the public that would potentially interact with cannabis or use it or possess it in some way, who are currently getting stuck in the criminal system in different ways and trying to find their way into the medical system. We know most of those guys aren't criminal killers that are in the public health's interest and the police's interest as well.
Right.
And as we've seen with Germany, you can still have a pretty functioning society without that absolute focus on what drugs a person is in possession of. And obviously, you can expand that out from cannabis into an argument for, say, psychedelics and other drugs that are available. But on the
Yeah.
whole, yeah, I think and I think a lot of British people are quite interested in the stance that Germany's taken and the approach that Germany's gone for. And with the scrutiny at the moment that medical cannabis is sort of getting in the UK news, it does reopen the debate as to has the current system that the UK's got actually solved the problems that it was meant to. And I think what we're seeing now and what's being discussed at the moment is that there's still tons of gaps in that system and lots of things that we overlooked, which was that sort of public health side of things and the harm reduction side of things of, well, we know people are going to consume these drugs anyway. Can we facilitate a safer environment around that to promote safety rather than prosecute you for your safety? And
Right.
so, given the financial barriers and some of the challenges as well that there are with the medical cannabis system, do we need to control every interaction, every
Well,
interaction where cannabis and humans happens, and
well,
can
I
we
mean,
legislate and enforce that too? Probably
I
not,
mean,
but
if you're going to tell me I
can we
can't,
nurture it?
if you're going to tell people you can't use cannabis, why stop there? Why not say that about alcohol, tobacco, sugar, you know, over processed, ultra processed foods, um, you know, soft drinks. I mean, the list can go on, and many of those things I just mentioned are actually more worse for your health than cannabis. You know, certainly tobacco is. Alcohol is too. I'm not suggesting any of those things should be outlawed, but you know, um, where it's that line is to decide that we will now tell other people what they should do for their own health. I see plenty of people, especially in the U.S., who are morbidly obese. No one's going around arresting them. And once again, I don't think they should be. But point is, um, and also you mentioned earlier. Actually, I want to come back to one point you mentioned earlier. That the police say that it makes their job more difficult, which I've never understood that argument. To why is their job more difficult by saying you don't need to harass and arrest people for this substance anymore? Um, you know, in my world, their job has just gotten easier. They can go, like you said, deal with other crimes that are causing harm to other people. But many police groups around the world in many countries always use this argument that somehow it makes their job more difficult, which makes zero sense to me. Do you know what they mean by that, or what the supposed logic behind that is?
I mean, I think ultimately the police know what the criminals are like and what challenges that maybe proposes and how rules and legislation is sometimes exploited. So I think they're coming at it from a very proactive, anticipating harm perspective, where they can sort of see how actual criminals would have used that system. But then at the same time, I think it comes to just giving them a bit more of a perspective around, well, that actually frees up your time to tackle those guys more aggressively, and maybe not aggressively, but just allocate some more resources. There's not as much general paperwork being filled in, as a small example.
You mean like for like the big dealers who are dealing illegally, kilos
Sure.
at a time? Yeah,
For
I mean
example.
that's simple enough. I mean, even the laws in Germany or any other country where it's legal now, they all say you can have up to so much. In Germany, you can have 50 grams on you. Same Czech Republic's doing the same thing. You know, it's not like you can walk around with a wheelbarrow of cannabis and sell it to whoever you want on the street just because it's legal. I mean, yeah, it's these false fears that the anti-cannabis lobby. It's not an organized lobby necessarily, but the anti-cannabis people have always used, which are really all pretty bogus. And many studies have shown, that it's not a gateway drug, even though politicians still say it is. It doesn't lead to more children using it by legalizing it. That's been shown again and again in multiple countries. But everyone keeps using these weird arguments, even though data always shows the opposite. Don't really have a question there, just just a statement, I guess.
It's just a big educational element to it, I think, Andy. And I think we sort of touched on it before, like with typically we think about sort of like a policy change, and it's an update to a section of paper, let's say, elsewhere, but that means massive operational changes at ground level too, oftentimes. And I think what the UK's made as a mistake is that we haven't really brought police up to speeds with those legislative changes. And so already the police are behind on what the law is currently.
Mm-hmm.
And then having spoken to quite a few police forces and constabularies around the UK about it, it hasn't really been framed to them as like the actual benefits for them. Like, guys, do you want to be policing 18-year-olds, or do you want to be catching the guys with machetes, let's say? Whenever I've had a conversation with the police force, and I've been speaking to police about cannabis for a good 5-10 years probably now as well. I think we're at like 9-8 years worth of cannabinoid discussions. At a community level, the police don't want to be catching cannabis consumers or users. They want to be going after organised criminals and organised crime, which is their fundamental sort of purpose for being, protect the public. I think what ends up happening, though, is that the police are very scared of getting outed by the media in some ways, being sympathetic to drug use or crime in that sense. And so that's what I always see the sort of conflict being, is that, okay, if the police say they're going to target or reduce their focus on cannabis, they get scrutinized by the media for being loose on drugs and soft on crime, which is not the case at all.
Right.
But they're just trying to deprioritize like low-level crimes. And so they often don't have a counter-argument to that, because no one's given them a nice dossier of decriminalization and the benefits of it in different ways. So I think half of that is like the academic sales pitch almost, and like the scientific sales pitch to them. Well, actually, there's a lot more to it than... This is a far more multidisciplinary, multidimensional solution than binary, legal, illegal. It comes with a system around that, basically, that can help you with the unknowns. But we do a very bad job of... There's what gets in the news and what gets talked about. Sorry, my hand's off screen. There's what gets talked about in the news and what's semi-important, or what we're sort of told to talk about, as for like paid media and advertising campaigns, etc. And then there's the really important stuff and information that doesn't get to the right sources and the right people. And this is very distracting, and this is very quiet as well. And this is got some nice funding behind it and it's on TV or on your social media. I think that same sort of sales pitch needs to be maybe framed around that decriminalization conversation for us anyway.
Yeah.
So and obviously there's groups out there doing that, but it's in terms of like spending power and the amount of hours and eyeballs that each discussion sort of getting, it's very imbalanced. And I think that's
Yeah.
what would, like, the appetite's there, the problem's there, the solution's clear, but the messaging, I think, is now the challenge, is like the communication of all of that. And I don't know if,
Right.
how do you think Germany's done overall, Andy, in terms of like that rollout part from, okay, we've changed the policy, but then how do we, the downstream implications and implementation of that? Do you think they've done a
I mean,
reasonable job?
I don't know if I can give a very good answer for that because literally you've seen no significant difference in society or anything
Exactly,
else.
yeah.
You know, so now people. I have a few friends who grow plants at home. Okay, I had a few friends before it was legal who grew. Probably a few more grow now than did before, but it's not like they have a plantation in their backyard now. So, and especially in Berlin, you smelled cannabis on a regular basis out on the sidewalks already. And I haven't really noticed that you smell it more. But you could be walking down the sidewalk and you would smell it and you would see the cops and they also smelled it and didn't do anything, didn't go looking for it. This is before legalization, so I've seen no difference.
That's funny you say that.
And
Everyone conceptualizes over here that overnight there'd be pandemonium, there'd be cannabis everywhere, there'd be
right,
there's all these young people smoking cannabis everywhere.
right.
Like all the evil scenarios. It's so funny that you said, "Oh yeah, I mean, what do you mean, Chris? There's been no difference." Like, I thought
I mean,
that's a funny answer to hear compared to like the
and I'm in the
hysterics
industry.
that people would imagine.
I'm in the industry, so I'm
Yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit more observant about these things, I think, than the average person who has nothing to do with it. But maybe I'm less observant due to that. I don't know. I mean, I think the main thing I've noticed really is due to those changes in laws that I mentioned earlier that now you have telemedicine clinics. And so it's a lot easier for people to access prescriptions and so on. So also, once again, not something I personally have observed other than through the data that's out there. But it's not like I see people running around with their prescription down the sidewalk, giving away cannabis or something, or whatever weirdness would happen. So once again, I've noticed no difference. I think Germany's done a pretty good job of it, actually. Mainly because I haven't noticed anything really. I don't know how else to put it. But we're running out of time here, Chris, and so we didn't really get time to talk about what you do so much. But why don't you give us a couple of sentences about what Global Cannabinoid Solutions does and how people can reach you if they want more information, if they want to take advantage of some of the educational offerings you have, or some of your consulting services, or whatever it may be.
Well, thank you, Andy. That's very thoughtful. In a nutshell, having observed, noted, and developed some solutions and ideas and thoughts as to how this industry can progress, how many of the industry issues that businesses face could be quite simply solved or addressed, we have developed a intelligence process that essentially arms businesses, entrepreneurs, and executives with the latest information, the highest quality knowledge, perfect networks filled with lots of useful, incredible people who are great at what they do, and then research expertise and scientists basically on tap when you need them through our platform. And so we've tried to make the easiest way for people to get the best quality science and information possible. And so we've created a community where you can meet up with those people for free, connect with everything that we've created, free trainings, free resources, everything that we could do to arm the average member of the public, consumer, anyone entering the world of cannabis with the best possible quality information. And so you can join for free. You've got to sign up, create a little password, create a little account. You can update your profile, say who you are, what you're doing, what you're looking for, and start connecting, networking, and exploring all of the lovely resources and people that we've put together. Meet lovely people like Andy and Rick, and essentially find a nice route through the cannabis industry that's best for you. And we'll help you get there with training, different bits of scientific sort of services, and then helping you work with the best people possible to get there as well. And so overall, that's what we do. And our website, CannabisScienceTraining.com, is where we host everything. That's where the platform's found, and you can join for free and start building your wonderful ventures and visions for the cannabis industry, and we'll help you fill all those gaps and cracks along the way. And so most of the things that we've talked about, we've got a resource for at Global Cannabinoid Solutions, and basically everything's on CannabisScienceTrain.com as well. And so I'm sure we'll get bits of this podcast up there, and I'm sure we'll have some nice special sections in there as well for Andy, Rick, and the EUCannaJobs team. And we just want to put the best people with the best info and make it as an exciting and interesting and valuable, useful place as possible for good people, for the good of the industry. So, I think Andy and Rick are some of the best people in the cannabis sector, and be lovely to see you in there and connect with us and everyone else that we know and like as well. So,
Sounds
great.
great.
Andy, for all the wonderful work you do, and thank you, Rick, for supporting in the background as well, with all of the recruitment, all the jobs, and the growth of the industry too. So, thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I think obviously, the work you do is very important and great and very thorough. So I really appreciate that also. And thank you for your time today. We don't get to catch up soon or often enough, so it's nice catching up a little bit today. Everyone, thank you for joining us today also. You heard how you can get in touch with Chris and his team. Also, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can also find Chris on LinkedIn and his stuff on LinkedIn also. And if you're interested in hearing about a couple of opportunities, we will have a couple of jobs we're trying to fill at the end of this. And everyone, until next time, I'm Andy Mansfeld, wishing you a great day. Everyone stay informed, stay connected, and keep exploring the world of cannabis.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks, Andy.